For centuries, everyday people have been plagued with a condition known as sleep paralysis. During these episodes, victims lose control over their body with one exception: their eyes. For many, this experience leaves the victim traumatized as a sinking feeling begins to take over. One of anxiety and terror, wondering just how long they're going to be paralyzed. And that's when they feel it. They're not alone. With the limited movement they have, their eyes shoot around the room trying to place a face to the agonizing fear that's built up in their mind. For some, they never see anything, and after a few minutes, they regain control of their body. For many, however, they're met face to face with a shadowy figure described only as the Hatman, a menacing figure that strikes fear into the hearts of everyone who's ever laid eyes on him. Many doctors try to come up with rational explanations regarding this condition and the reasons behind it, but one question still remains. How can so many people spread across the earth, having no relation to one another and dating back to centuries ago, all see the same thing? Could it be that our minds are all connected one way or another to our fellow man? Or is the explanation much more sinister? In this episode, we'll be covering 4 terrifying user-submitted encounters with the mysterious Hatman. Enjoy. Number 1. My townhome is a loft. At the top of the stairs to the right is our open bedroom, and to the right of that is an open bathroom area that has the sink with it countertopped with a large mirror. One night I was starting to wake up, and my attention snapped to the top of the stairs where 3 dark figures stood. All 3 were silhouettes of shadows that were distinctly darker than the surrounding shadows. About 5 feet away from me were 2 figures. One was distinctly male and about 6 feet tall. The one next to him was more feminine with delicate curves and stood at about 5 foot 6 inches. The last was closer to me, only about 3 feet from me. I could tell she was a young female. This figure seemed to flicker and blur at the edges. I gasped as she tilted her head to the side as if she was asking me something. I could feel the curiosity coming from them. It seemed like they had been expecting someone else and were confused by our presence there. After about a minute, they seemed to lose focus and then fade away. I was shaken up because I had never experienced anything like this before. I didn't like that someone had been there while I was sleeping, and it felt like an invasion of my home. After that first night, I would start to wake up around 2 a.m. to find the tall male figure standing at the top of the stairs. Sometimes he would be facing me full on, but other times he would be standing with his left shoulder towards me, and he'd be looking at me with his head turned. Usually when his head was turned, he seemed to be wearing a hat with a small brim like a bowler hat of some type. It could have been 2 different figures, but it was hard to tell. When I woke up, we would watch each other for a minute or 2, and then he would leave. This happened in different ways as well. Sometimes he would blur and I would simply lose focus of him. Then the shadows would be lighter. Other times he would simply turn and walk down the stairs. After about 2 nights of this, I began to notice that I was hot after I would see him. The room would be very warm, but would cool considerably once he was gone. This went on for 4 nights in a row. On the 5th night, I woke up with a startle at 2 a.m., but I couldn't see anything. I was just very warm. As I tried to get back to sleep, I listened to my husband's deep, even breathing to calm down. Suddenly, he sat bolt upright, yelling and holding his nose. "Why would you do that?" he yelled at me. Shocked, I asked what had happened. He told me that it felt like I had taken a bundle of my hair and shoved it up his left nostril. I told him it wasn't me, and he calmed down and asked if I had seen anything. I said no, but I had not been looking over on his side of the bed. He was irritated and hot. We checked the thermostat. It was set at 68 degrees, but the room temperature was 76. For a week, things were quiet, but my health was declining. I had to go to the emergency room and I had my IUD removed due to severe pain. I took the next day off of work, and that night everything changed. That night I began to have a strange dream about being in a desert. There was an extremely hot spot on my back between my shoulder blades, and another hot spot on my lower abdomen below my belly button. I could feel myself slowly waking from the dream. It was like my consciousness was being pulled forward through molasses. As I realized I was waking, I waited for the hot spots to dissipate with the dream, but they did not. They became more defined. They took on shape. The one on my back clearly became a right hand pressed underneath me. The fingers were long and very thin with a long oval palm. The hot spot on my abdomen took shape of a left hand. The pinky and ring finger were tucked slightly into my underwear. They were just laying on me. Once I realized I was being touched, my eyes snapped open and I gasped. Looming over me was the tall female figure. Next to her, right next to my head, was the short female figure. They were whispering very quickly. I didn't understand anything that they were saying. The voices seemed to vibrate and hum in my ears. They were very excited about something. When I looked at the smaller figure, she laid her hand on my eyes and said, "Shh." I woke up at 1 p.m. the next day. I felt incredibly calm and somehow excited. I felt better than I had all year. More awake, more alive, and for the first time in weeks, pain-free. I attributed this to having my IUD removed and hormones out of my body because I still felt uneasy about the shadows. It was so strange, and I can't honestly say I'm sure I had even woken up that night. It had all happened so fast. I felt confused and scared that they had touched me. I didn't like that they thought they could manifest that way. I still don't. The next 3 nights I started to wake on the dot at 2 a.m. to find the tall man back at the top of my stairs. On the 3rd night I woke to my cat purring loudly in my ear. She was sitting next to my pillow staring at the shadow man. At this point he was just annoying me because I couldn't sleep under observation. I told him to go away. I said I was sick of being woken up to leave us alone. 2 nights later I woke again. This time I could only see the left side of his head and the brim of his hat looking at me around the corner of the staircase. I couldn't help but laugh, and as soon as I did, he was gone down the stairs. That weekend I went and got some crystals and sage. I'm sick of being woken up, and the thought that they could touch me and force me to sleep kept nagging at me. After the burning things were peaceful and the home felt totally different, I slept better than I ever had in this house, and the nights became nice and cool. I thought that everything had been solved. I've been very sick with the flu for the last week and a half. Last week I stayed home from work the whole week. On Wednesday the 29th of April I woke up drenched in sweat. I thought it was the fever and fretfully tried to get comfortable. I turned my back to the room but couldn't stay that way as chills ran up my spine. I looked down the staircase and saw the tall man's shadow. He seemed to flicker for a moment, then expanded. He covered the entire wall and spread out over the top of the mirror and across the wall at the foot of my bed. I couldn't breathe, I was so scared. The light in the kitchen, my cell phone, and my husband's cell phone all turned on at the same time, and then he was gone. I was so scared I was shaking and began to cry. My husband woke up, went downstairs to turn off the light, and switched sides of the bed with me. I was sleeping with my back to the room. I woke up to the feeling of what felt like 3 fingers moving down my spine. The middle finger was on my spine with the ring finger and first finger on either side. When they reached the center of my back, they pushed. They felt like the first finger and ring finger sank into my back. Sharp pain radiated through my body and I sat up. The lights and phones were all on again and I didn't see anything, but my back burned the rest of the night. The next day I burned more sage. I was sore, scared, and angry. I had a dream that I was at work. I couldn't hear my boss talking with my supervisor about firing a girl named Annie. In the dream, I could feel her behind me, but I couldn't turn. I felt hands on my shoulders and a female voice said my name right in my ear. It was like my consciousness snapped like a rubber band to being awake. My attention immediately snapped to a dark shadow standing at the end of the bathroom counter. It was normal-sized, but seemed to have no legs because of how high it stood. It was male and seemed to flicker back and forth from looking at me, from the side to straight on. When he would be solid, I could see him casting a lighter shadow on the wall. I was petrified. He felt angry. When I told him to go away, he tilted his head to the side. I woke my husband, who went over and turned the lights on. He said that area was warm. I'm honestly very scared now. I don't know much about shadow people, and I'm looking into them more since I can't think of anything else. I'm worried that I've just made them very angry by burning sage, and as soon as I got sick and my defenses were weak, they found a way back into my home. Have there been reports of them hurting anyone? Am I dealing with shadow people, or have I crossed the line into something else? Why would they go months showing up and be angry when they did? Number 2. My grandmother and grandfather built their house in the late 80s and finished it in the early 90s. Every time I would try to sleep at night, I would just feel like someone was watching me. It's unsettling, and even more unsettling for a small child. I eventually would just leave and go back home and forget all about it. Then once I started to live with my grandmother at her house, shit just went down the drain. I lived in one of the back rooms that was right under the attic. At first, it started with people talking in the attic. I would leave my room to see if my family was here, but there was already nobody there. Plus, it was like 2 a.m. It just got more and more intense. I had mirrors on my closet door, and that turned out to be a bad decision on my part. I would be getting dressed and look at the mirrors, and there's a full black mass standing near my window, like it had the outline of a human dark as night, a full body with legs. Now that didn't scare me too much because I've seen worse, but it started to change its appearance over time, like it was trying to find out what would scare me. The shadow person, or demon, was very smart. I have to give it that. Now, I have been living in the house for over a year. Something started to attack me and make my moods change. I would be walking up the driveway to get the mail, and I would be so pissed off to the point I wanted to hurt someone. I'm not that type of person, and started to take note of what was happening. Then I started to wake up with scratches on my body, some burned while others had drawn blood. This is when I started to be so terrified that I would sleep with my mom or sleep with the lights on. I'm almost 20, and I do not get scared that easily, and that says something. Now I would go outside to smoke. I would leave the light on in my room, and this thing would be staring at me with red, bright eyes, just watching me as I was outside. Now at first, I thought maybe it was how my furniture was set up in my room, so I moved it around. The next day, it was there again, with a smirk on its face and those red, piercing eyes. This went on for about another year until I finally moved out. The worst part is, it would follow you into the bathroom and watch you take a shower. One day, it even left its handprint on the shower door where the moisture had gathered. At first, I thought it was my handprint, but then I put mine next to it and it was completely different. It was about 2 sizes bigger than mine, and it had pointy claw-like fingertips. Then the shadow person, being the evil asshole that it is, started to attack and bother my mother and sister. That is when I drew the line. I finally brought in a medium to cleanse the house and get rid of whatever this thing was. Now, I am still young and learning how to control my abilities. The medium ended up closing a portal that I had opened. I was utterly shocked and could not believe that I had opened a portal. She told us that it was pure evil and came out of the portal. She closed the portal and we had to put rose quartz, crosses, and things of peace and love around the house because that would help keep it away. Plus, we have to spray every part of the house with this special water to keep evil things out of the house. I'm about to move back to the house. I guess I will have to see if it all helps keep it away for good, or maybe I'm just fucked. Number 3. My first encounter happened in 1968 when I was 5 years old and living in Kentucky. My experiences occurred night after night, sometimes skipping a night or two, but I was visited by the Shadow Man dozens of times over the course of about a year. I shared a bedroom with my brother, and we had bunk beds. He slept in the top bunk and I slept in the bottom bunk. During the night, I would suddenly awaken and be absolutely terrified. I wouldn't be able to move, and I would actually break out in a cold sweat because I knew he was there. In the doorway, there was always a faint light from down the hall, and I would see the Shadow Man peeking around the edge of the door frame. I would be so scared I couldn't even speak and could only move my eyes. I knew if I closed my eyes, he would get me, so I would try to keep my eyes open as long as possible. It It was as if he couldn't move if I was looking at him. Eventually, I'd have to blink, and with each blink, the shadow man got closer. First, he would be peeking around the door frame, then he'd be standing in the doorway, then closer and closer with each time my eyes closed and opened again. I never saw him walk towards me or move. It was as if a cardboard cutout was closer each time I blinked. He was a solid black shape with a sharp outline but no discernible features. He appeared to be wearing a coat about knee length and a wide-brimmed hat. From his height to the door, I would guess he was between 5'5" and 6 foot tall. I was instinctively terrified of him, and I have no idea why. I would try to call out for my mother or father, but couldn't get a sound out. I felt pressure, but all over me. I can't even explain it well, but it was almost that I would imagine being in a vacuum. That's what it felt like. It was almost as if there was no air. If I couldn't manage to break free and call out, the shadow man would get closer and closer until he was just 3 or 4 feet from my bed, and after that I have no memory. If I was able to call out, immediately it felt as a spell was broken and I would be able to move again. Also, as soon as I called out, the shadow man would turn around and walk quickly out the doorway and to the left, towards the living room. This was the only time I saw him walk. He would walk away from me, but not towards me. Sometimes my mother would come around the doorway from the right side just as the shadow man went out to the left side, and I could never understand why she never saw him. She would tell me I just had a nightmare, and as a good child, I tried to believe her. We didn't live in that house very long, and after that we moved. I'd never had that experience or nightmare again. In about 2004, I took a trip to Florida and stayed in a supposedly haunted B&B. During the night, I experienced the same paralyzed feeling of being in a vacuum, but this time there was no fear. I could also feel myself being pulled toward the edge of the bed. I knew if I could find my voice, I could stop it, so I mustered up the strength to say out loud, "Stop it!" And it worked. This experience brought back memories of my childhood torment, and was exactly the same physical feeling of being in a vacuum, only without the fear. So I wondered if the shadow man of my childhood was a ghost. In 2010, I was working in a warehouse in Tennessee, and one day, during my shift, between 7 a.m. and noon, I was working at my station with no one around within at least 20 feet. My workstation was at the end of a long conveyor lane, and there was only one way in and one way out, which was to my left, and you had to walk at least 25 feet to reach the main aisle. Suddenly, as I was about to turn to the left to leave, I saw out of the corner of my eye a shadow person standing just to my left and slightly behind me. I had been working and sort of zoned out and not really paying attention, so I thought it was a person, and I was about to bump into them. I stopped and sort of stepped back because it felt like it was a solid person standing there. But when I looked, there was no one there. The shadow had been a tall, big shadow of at least 6 feet, and very, very black with distinct edges. I was scared. I was actually just mystified. The shadow person appeared in broad daylight at work. I'm really curious about these experiences and would like to find out more about them. What are these shadows? What is the physical sensation I felt? I never thought of ghosts appearing during the day, and that's a bit disconcerting to me. Are they attracted to me? Am I just more sensitive to them? Are there good and bad shadow people? I hope to find out soon. Number 4. Let me preface my story by saying that I've always had a morbid curiosity with paranormal events, sightings, people, etc. At the time of my specific experience, I was working in different cities and states all over the USA, and would make it a point during downtime to visit local haunted places, tours, and stuff like that. One such place I visited was the Bell Witch Cave in Tennessee, which was a very beautiful place. This instance took place sometime in 2008 or 2009 while I was visiting a longtime friend in Orange County, California. Let me also state that he lives at the end of a cul-de-sac with a major cemetery approximately 100 feet from the property. One night, sometime around 2 or 3 a.m., we went back to his house after a night of drinking and hanging out. got back to his house, made a late night snack, and soon went to bed. I cannot remember exactly how long I had been laying down, but I remember what happened and will never forget. I woke up with the feeling of a weight on my chest. I couldn't breathe, nor could I move. When I opened my eyes, I could see a shadowy silhouette of a man that seemed to be dressed in a long overcoat and wearing a fedora-type hat. I could not move in any direction, though I remember trying with all my might to kick off the covers and try and get out of bed. Thinking back, I almost felt like who or what at the end of my bed was almost getting pleasure from my distress. I finally was able to roll out of bed, get dressed as fast as I could, and left his house. I went to the nearest motel and got a room and spent the rest of the night there. He called me later that morning to see what the heck I was doing running out of his house in the early morning, so I explained what had happened. Here's where things got a little stranger. Turns out that whenever he would have girlfriends spend the night, sometimes during the night the girls would complain of being scratched, hair pulled, pinched, and even the occasional crazy dream. A year or so later, his parents had put up the house for sale, as they wanted a smaller house to retire in. A girl whom he was dating at the time had said her mother was a psychic or clairvoyant of sorts. When her mother visited the house, she claimed that 3 active spirits in the house were trying to get her attention. The first, a teenage girl between 15 and 19 years old, whom she had said committed suicide back in the 1920s. The spirit had become attached to my buddy and was most likely behind the torment of any girls he became close with. The second, a 20-something-year-old girl who had died giving birth somewhere close by. She said that spirit had been real fond of his parents' bathroom tub for some reason. And the third, a man aged between 30 and 40 who had been hit by a car while walking home to his family in the mid-1950s. If I recall correctly, the driver who killed him never stopped to render aid. According to my friend, his girlfriend's mother had performed some sort of ritual that released all the spirits. A chill flew down my spine when he described the man that had been killed in a hit-and-run accident. Though, this was all before I heard about the dark man in a hat who has been spotted all over the world, pretty much the same way each time. That experience pretty much ended my curiosity of paranormal activities. But I've had some similar Hatman experiences since. Maybe 1 or 2 at most. Hey guys, that wraps up episode 3 of Shadow Encounters. I wanted to thank you for tuning in and say that if you have any crazy experiences with shadow people or the Hatman that you would like to share with me, you can send it to the email address on the screen and I will get back to you relatively quickly because I don't have a life, and that is something I'm working on. However, for the time being, go ahead and like and subscribe if you enjoyed this and share it with all your friends. And if we start getting more subscribers to this channel, then I will be a little more persistent with uploading once a week. I know it's been probably a couple months since I've done it, but I'm trying to get better. I'm trying to, plan out my days a little better. So also, I wanted to apologize. In this particular episode, there was a few slip-ups where certain stories that are written in have mistakes or don't make sense in certain areas, and so I try to correct it on the spot and make it sound a little more understandable. But in the end, I usually just end up fucking it up. So I apologize if there's any slips or stutters or some soft crying, maybe. I don't know. But I realize that this episode is pretty fucking long, so if you guys like longer episodes, let me know. If not, then I'll try to keep them a little shorter and not bore you to death. But let me know what you think, and be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you guys next week. Have a good one.